Sir, you need to get out of that seat immediately. This is reserved for our valued platinum passengers, not for someone like you. Those words cut through the cabin like a knife, cold, humiliating, and dripping with contempt. And in that instant, the entire first-class section turned its eyes toward one man, Jamal Thompson, a black CEO who had done nothing wrong except sit in the seat he had rightfully paid for. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Comment below, hit like, and subscribe to keep these voices alive. Now, back to the story. Jamal sat calmly in seat 2A, the seat printed clearly on his boarding pass, the seat he had chosen days earlier when booking this flight from Atlanta to San Francisco. His calm demeanor didn't come from ignorance of what was happening. It came from years of learning how to control his emotions when people tried to define him by the color of his skin rather than the depth of his achievements. Across the aisle stood Brenda Hargrove, a white woman in her 50s with perfectly styled hair and an expensive pearl necklace, tapping her watch as though the world should move faster for her convenience. "That's my seat," she hissed, her voice low enough to sound personal but loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "I always sit there. I am a regular on this airline." The words weren't just entitled. They were laced with a condescension that made the moment heavy with tension. Jamal lifted his boarding pass slowly, his deep voice calm but firm. "This is seat 2A. My name is on it. I checked in like every other passenger." He placed the ticket in front of Emily Carter, the young flight attendant whose smile was frozen tight, betraying the discomfort she felt but refused to show in front of Brenda. Emily glanced at the pass, her lips pressing together, then said the line that set the stage for the storm ahead. "I understand, but sometimes we need to accommodate very special guests, and Mrs. Hargrove is one of them. Would you mind moving back to business class?" The audacity of the request stirred murmurs among passengers. A man in row 3 lowered his newspaper. A young woman discreetly raised her phone to record. Jamal leaned back, exhaling slowly, remembering his father's voice from long ago, telling him, "Never let them take your dignity, no matter how they try." His father, a factory worker in Atlanta, had once been fired for speaking out against unfair treatment, and that wound had shaped Jamal into the man he became, a man who built a $3 billion tech empire dedicated to exposing and eliminating bias in customer service. But here he was, decades later, still being told he didn't belong in a seat he had earned with his money and his merit. Lena Brooks, a journalist sitting a few rows behind, noticed the shift in atmosphere. She had been sipping coffee, preparing notes for a story she planned to write about the Tech Equity Summit in San Francisco, but now she sensed something bigger unfolding right in front of her. She pulled out her phone, angled it discreetly, and pressed record. Brenda folded her arms, her smug expression daring Jamal to resist. "It's really not that hard," she said. "You can just move. People like me fly here all the time." Her phrasing, her tone, the way she looked him up and down, it was all coded language, the kind that sounded polite on the surface, but carried the weight of centuries of prejudice. Jamal smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but as a shield. "With respect, ma'am, I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Emily, caught between policy, bias, and pressure, glanced toward the curtain where Dylan Reeves, the cabin supervisor, had been observing. Dylan stepped forward, his voice heavier, authoritative. "Sir, we don't want to escalate this. Let's handle this quietly. Please gather your things." The tension climbed higher. The storm outside delaying the flight only mirrored the storm building inside. Jamal stayed rooted in his seat, his hands resting calmly on the armrest, his voice steady. "I will not move. I paid for this seat. I checked in properly, and I deserve the same respect as any other customer." Brenda let out a sharp laugh, the kind meant to humiliate, not entertain. Respect? Please, don't make this about race. It's just about priority. Some of us are regulars here. Her words hung in the air, dripping with irony, because everyone could see it was exactly about race, about perception, about who was seen as deserving and who was not. Passengers whispered, some shifting uncomfortably, others watching with quiet anticipation. Lena zoomed her camera slightly, capturing the expressions, the body language, the injustice that was unfolding. Dylan's jaw tightened, and his tone grew sharp. If you refuse to comply, we'll have to involve the captain. And that's when Jamal knew this was more than a misunderstanding. This was a test of his very identity. He thought back to his younger years, coding in a cramped apartment in Atlanta, dreaming of creating technology that could detect bias before it ruined someone's day, before it destroyed someone's chance. He thought of the countless hours, the sacrifices, the rejection letters, and finally the breakthrough that made Innovate AI Corp a global leader. Yet here, in the cabin of Apex Airways, none of that seemed to matter. Emily's face tightened with frustration. Brenda's smirk widened with confidence. Dylan's voice grew more insistent. Jamal remained still, but inside, he was already preparing. He knew who he was. He knew what he owned. And he knew this moment was about to change everything. Not just for him, but for everyone watching, everyone recording, everyone who would see the truth once the story spread far beyond this cabin. The cabin grew heavier as Dylan Reeves stepped closer. His uniform crisp, but his eyes betraying a mix of loyalty to his airline and the quiet desperation of a man drowning in personal debt. A man who had already accepted bribes in the past to bend rules for so-called regulars like Brenda Hargrove. And today he was about to cross that line again. Brenda slid her hand discreetly into her purse, the soft rustle of cash evident to Dylan, though carefully hidden from others. And with a nod, he accepted her unspoken offer. A deal struck in seconds that turned a professional into an accomplice. "Sir, last warning. Gather your belongings and follow me to business class," Dylan declared, his voice carrying the weight of authority he hoped would silence resistance. Jamal remained still, his deep voice calm but firm. "I am not moving. I have a right to this seat, and I will not be intimidated." The murmurs grew louder. A man in row 4 whispered, "This isn't right," while another shook his head, muttering, "Just let the lady sit. It's not worth the trouble." The divide among passengers mirrored the divide in society itself. Emily Carter looked nervously between Dylan and Brenda, her conscience wrestling with her financial struggles, the overdue bills waiting at home, the loan sharks who had been calling her phone. She told herself this was survival, not cruelty, yet each word she spoke tightened the rope around her integrity. "Sir, we are asking you politely, but you're making this difficult," she said. Her smile strained. Jamal leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Dylan. "You are making it difficult, not me. I followed every rule, and yet I am the one being singled out. Why?" His words landed like a hammer, not shouted, not angry, but filled with truth. And that truth pierced the thin veil of professionalism the crew tried to maintain. Lena Brooks, her phone steady in her hand, whispered into the camera, "This is discrimination, plain and simple, and everyone watching will see it." Dylan's patience snapped, and he reached toward Jamal's phone, trying to snatch it away. Gasps echoed through the cabin. Jamal shifted his hand, pulling the device close to his chest, his voice sharp now. "Do not touch me. Do not touch my property." Brenda's laughter cut through the moment, sharp and cruel. "Oh, come on. Just remove him already. He's holding up the entire flight." Her entitlement dripped like venom, feeding Dylan's anger and Victor Hale's ambition, because at that very moment, Dylan had called for backup, and through the radio came the voice of Victor Hale, the senior airport manager, a man whose past was tangled with Brenda's in ways most people didn't know. Victor, a former military officer turned airline executive, carried with him the rigid mindset of control, order, and a barely concealed prejudice shaped by years of biased conditioning. He had once been Brenda's partner in both business and romance, and though their relationship had ended, his loyalty to her remained, clouding his judgment. When Victor strode onto the jet bridge minutes later, his presence radiated authority, his polished shoes striking the floor with deliberate rhythm. "What's the problem here?" he barked, his eyes locking onto Jamal as though he had already decided the verdict. Emily spoke quickly. "This passenger refuses to comply, sir," Dylan added. "He's disrupting the boarding process." Brenda, with her practiced sigh, leaned into Victor's ear. "He's in my seat again. You know I always take 2A, but he just won't move." Victor nodded slowly, his jaw tightening, and then he turned toward Jamal with a glare that carried not just authority, but disdain. "Sir, this is airport authority speaking. I need you to step off this plane immediately or face removal by security." Jamal inhaled deeply, his hand gripping the armrest, his mind flashing to the advice of his father who once said, "Stand tall, even when the ground shakes beneath you." He rose from his seat, not because he accepted their demand, but because he understood that staying seated would lead to a physical confrontation he wanted to avoid. His eyes scanned the faces around him, seeing the fear, the silence, the quiet complicity. He saw the young woman still recording, her hands trembling but her courage steady. He saw a businessman lower his gaze, unwilling to take a stand, and he saw Brenda smirking, convinced she had won. As Jamal stepped into the aisle, Victor gestured toward the exit, his voice laced with arrogance. "Let's go, sir. You've wasted enough of our time." Jamal paused, turning back to the cabin, his voice calm but powerful. "Remember what you've all seen here today, because the truth has a way of finding light." He walked toward the exit, flanked by 2 uniformed security officers summoned by Victor. One of them, a young black man, glanced at Jamal with unease, his eyes silently apologizing for being part of the charade. Lena followed close behind, her phone still recording, whispering to her audience. "They're escorting him out for nothing but sitting in his seat. This video is going live now." And with one tap, the world outside the plane was about to know the injustice happening inside. By the time Jamal reached the jet bridge, the storm outside the airport matched the storm raging within him. He remembered the nights coding in his small apartment. The nights he dreamt of building technology that could expose the very biases he was enduring at this moment. He remembered the promises he made to himself after watching his father suffer, that he would never allow injustice to go unchallenged. And though they thought they had humiliated him, he knew they had only set the stage for their downfall. Victor leaned close, his voice low and threatening. "You think your money or your position matters here? On this ground? I'm in charge?" Jamal turned his head slowly, his expression calm but his words cutting. "We'll see about that." Brenda remained in the cabin, her victory short-lived as whispers grew louder, passengers questioning what they had just witnessed. Dylan and Emily exchanged nervous glances, realizing the video was already spreading beyond their control. And Captain Robert Hayes, silent up to this point, gave a brief nod of approval to Victor's actions, choosing career safety over justice. What none of them realized was that the tide had already turned, because in less than an hour, Lena's video would explode online. The hashtag Apex Discrimination would light up feeds across the country, and the power they thought they held over one man would unravel before millions. For Jamal, being forced off that plane was not an ending, but the ignition of something much larger, something that would shake Apex Airways to its very core, and as he walked through the terminal, escorted like a criminal. His phone buzzed with a message from his COO, Sofia Ramirez. "We saw the video. We're ready to fight." The moment Jamal's shoes touched the polished floor of the terminal, the illusion of silence was shattered by the constant vibration of his phone. Notifications pouring in as Lena's video began to spread like wildfire across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, each platform igniting with outrage under the hashtag that was already trending, hashtag Apex Discrimination, a storm of voices demanding answers before the plane had even left the gate. Jamal, flanked by 2 security guards, walked with the same calm dignity that had carried him through every boardroom battle, every attempt to diminish his worth. And though they tried to escort him like a man guilty of something, his stride declared otherwise, his posture unbroken, his voice measured. He turned to the guards, his tone calm but firm. "I will leave peacefully, but understand this. I am not the one at fault today." One of the guards, the young black officer who had glanced at him with regret earlier, nodded slightly, a silent gesture of respect, while the older one kept his gaze fixed ahead. Unwilling to engage, Lena stayed close, still recording, her commentary sharp and unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing blatant discrimination. A paying passenger with a valid ticket has been removed simply because someone else thought they deserved his seat more. This isn't just wrong, it's illegal, and the world deserves to see it." Her words punctuated every second of footage, adding context that millions would soon hear. Within minutes, the video had crossed 1 million views, then 2, then 3, climbing faster than anyone could have imagined, celebrities retweeting it, civil rights advocates demanding action, ordinary people sharing their own stories of humiliation in airports. Jamal's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Sofia Ramirez, his COO and closest ally. He answered, his voice steady. "I'm out of the cabin." Sofia didn't waste a second. "We've seen the video. Jamal, it's everywhere. I've already contacted our legal team, and we are preparing to file immediate action against Apex Airways. The board is going to be in chaos once they realize who they just humiliated." Jamal's lips curved into a faint smile, not of joy, but of resolve. "Good. Let them scramble. It's time they learn accountability." Lena turned her phone toward him, asking, "Do you want to say something on record right now?" Jamal paused, his father's voice echoing in his memory. "Stand tall, speak truth, and let your actions carry weight." He looked directly into the lens. "To everyone watching, I want you to know this isn't just about me. This is about the countless people who have been told they don't belong, who have been treated as less than because of how they look or where they come from today. I was told to give up a seat I rightfully paid for, but tomorrow it could be you, your child, your parent. We must demand better." His words, measured and powerful, ricocheted across social media within minutes, quoted by reporters, replayed by activists, dissected by analysts. Meanwhile, Victor Hale, still on the jet bridge, realized the tide was turning and tried to salvage control. He pulled Lena aside briefly, lowering his voice. "Listen, we don't need this going further. I can make this worth your while. A freelance journalist like you could use a steady paycheck, maybe even some connections. Delete the video and we'll forget all of this ever happened." Lena didn't flinch, her phone still recording, capturing every syllable of his attempted bribe. "Are you trying to silence the truth with money, Mr. Hale?" Victor's eyes widened, realizing his mistake too late, as her words streamed live to thousands already tuned in. "I don't take bribes. I tell stories, and this one is already bigger than you." She stepped back, her hand steady, her voice louder now. "Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard it yourself. The manager tried to cover this up with money. That's not accountability. That's corruption." Within an hour, Major news outlets were calling it the scandal of the day. The footage replayed across CNN, MSNBC, and trending on YouTube. Jamal's calm image contrasted sharply with the arrogance of Brenda, the desperation of Dylan, the cold compliance of Emily, and now the corruption of Victor. Meanwhile, inside the first-class cabin, Brenda sat smugly in seat 2A, sipping champagne. Unaware that her name was about to become synonymous with entitlement, passengers whispered, some condemning her, others quietly agreeing. But the truth was already beyond her reach. Jamal walked to a quiet corner of the terminal with Lena and the security guards, finally free of their escort, and checked his watch. The storm in Atlanta delayed flights for hours, but the real storm was already unleashed. Sophia called again, this time with urgency. Jamal, listen carefully. We've got leverage. They don't know it yet, but you own 28% of Apex Airways. That makes you the largest individual shareholder. You also have a $60 million contract on the table that they desperately need to survive the quarter. This isn't just about public outrage anymore. It's about their financial survival. You hold the cards. Jamal nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. Then it's time to play them. His phone buzzed again, this time with messages from friends, allies, even strangers thanking him for standing up. One read, "My father was thrown off a flight years ago. Thank you for speaking for us," another said. "Watching you gives me hope." Jamal felt the weight of those voices, each one adding to his resolve. He turned to Lena. "This isn't just my fight anymore. It belongs to all of them, too." Meanwhile, Victor paced inside a back office, his mind racing. He called Brenda, his voice sharp. "You better be ready. This is spiraling out of control." Brenda laughed lightly, still believing she held the upper hand. "Victor, please, it's just a video. These things come and go. They'll forget about it by tomorrow." Victor slammed his fist on the desk. "You don't understand. Brenda, the man you humiliated isn't just anyone. He's Jamal Thompson. He's the CEO of Innovate AI, a billionaire, and he owns nearly a third of this airline. We've picked the wrong fight." Brenda's smile faded as the reality sank in, her glass trembling slightly in her hand. Back in the terminal, Jamal opened his laptop, connecting to Sophia and his legal team over video call. "We're moving now," he instructed. "Prepare a statement, notify the shareholders, and draft demands. They will fire every single person involved, and they will overhaul their system, or I will take my stake and walk away. And when I walk, the company collapses." The team nodded, their faces filled with determination. Lena continued to broadcast live, narrating every move. "You're watching history unfold. A man who was humiliated moments ago is about to change the future of an entire airline." By evening, Jamal's name trended worldwide. His calm defiance hailed as courage, his words quoted in headlines. Apex Airways issued a vague statement calling the incident regrettable. But it was too little, too late. Investors were panicking, stock prices falling, and reporters were digging into every corner of the company. Jamal leaned back in his chair, his father's voice steady in his heart. "Don't let them define you." And with that, he knew part one of the battle was over. The next would take place not in the cabin, but in the boardroom, where power, money, and justice would collide. In San Francisco, the glass towers of Apex Airways headquarters gleamed under the morning light, but inside the executive floor, the atmosphere was anything but bright. Because Edward Langston, the 60-year-old CEO, sat in a leather chair staring at 3 different screens, replaying the viral video that had now passed 10 million views. Each clip showing Jamal Thompson's calm dignity against the arrogance of his staff. And Edward knew in that instant that this was not just a public relations headache. It was an existential threat to his entire company. Around him, board members whispered in panic, a few demanding immediate action, others pleading to wait until more details emerged. But the truth was unavoidable. Apex's stock had already dropped 15% by mid-morning, wiping nearly $2 billion off the company's market value. Edward's assistant stepped in, pale and nervous. "Sir, Victor Hale is here. He says it's urgent." Edward clenched his jaw, gesturing for Victor to enter. The airport manager walked in, his posture stiff, his eyes scanning the room as if he still had authority to command. "This is being blown out of proportion," Victor began, his voice defensive. "The man refused instructions. We were just maintaining order." Edward leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Maintaining order? Victor, the whole country thinks we kicked a black man out of his seat for no reason. And not just any man. Jamal Thompson, the largest shareholder of this airline. Did you know who he was?" Victor's silence told the story before his words did. "I knew he was important, but not to that extent." Edward's fist hit the table, papers scattering. "Not to that extent? He owns nearly a third of Apex. He's negotiating a $60 million contract that could save our quarter, and you humiliated him in front of the world." The room went silent, the weight of the revelation sinking in. One of the board members, a sharp woman in her 50s named Margaret Dean, spoke coldly. "He won't negotiate anymore. He'll destroy us unless we move fast," another director whispered. "We can't afford this kind of scandal. If Jamal pulls his stake, our investors will follow." Edward turned back to Victor, his eyes narrowing. "Tell me exactly what happened." And so Victor tried to weave a story, claiming Jamal had been disruptive, that he refused safety instructions, that the crew acted only to de-escalate. But before his words could build momentum, Edward's assistant held up a tablet. "Sir, another video just surfaced." On the screen played Lena's recording of Victor offering her a bribe, his voice captured with chilling clarity. "Delete the video, and we'll forget all of this ever happened." Gasps echoed through the boardroom, and Edward's face turned crimson. "You tried to bribe a journalist? Are you insane?" Victor's composure cracked, sweat forming on his brow. "I was trying to protect the company," Edward's voice cut him down. "No, you were trying to protect yourself and Brenda Hargrove. Yes, we know about your history with her. You compromised your position and dragged this airline into hell," Victor stammered. "She's a loyal customer, I thought." But Edward slammed the table again. "She is nothing compared to the shareholder you just humiliated." The board erupted in overlapping voices, some calling for immediate firings, others arguing about legal exposure. But the decision was already being forced by the outside world. On CNN, Lena Brooks appeared live, her calm voice narrating the story, the footage playing behind her. "This is not just about one man in one seat," she said. "This is about a culture that allows bias to flourish unchecked. And today, Apex Airways is being forced to reckon with it." Across social media, hashtags multiplied, celebrities and politicians weighing in, civil rights organizations threatening boycotts. Meanwhile, in a quiet office across town, Jamal hosted a Zoom call with dozens of shareholders, his image calm but resolute. "You've all seen the video," he said, his deep voice filling the digital room. "And you know what it means. Apex cannot continue on this path. Either we demand accountability and rebuild this company on principles of fairness, or we allow it to collapse under the weight of its own corruption." Faces appeared on the screen, nodding, murmuring agreement. One shareholder asked bluntly, "What do you want, Jamal?" And Jamal answered without hesitation. "Every person involved must be fired. Brenda Hargrove must be banned from flying with this airline for life. Apex must implement mandatory anti-bias training across all departments within 30 days, and a public apology must be issued immediately. If not, I will withdraw my stake and pursue legal action that will cripple this company." His words were not threats. They were facts, and everyone knew it. Back at headquarters, Edward received the report of Jamal's demands. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, realizing he had no choice. We either give him what he wants or we lose everything, he muttered. A board member asked quietly. Can we negotiate? Edward shook his head. Not with Jamal Thompson. He doesn't bluff. Just then, Brenda Hargrove appeared on the news, her face smug, giving a statement outside her gated home. This is all being exaggerated, she told reporters. I didn't ask for anything more than what I deserved. I'm a loyal passenger, and I should be treated with respect. Her words poured gasoline on the fire. The clip replayed online with captions like "privilege on display" and "the face of entitlement." Sponsors began pulling ads from Apex. Travel bloggers urged boycotts, and customers flooded call centers canceling tickets. Edward felt the walls closing in, his decades of work unraveling in hours. He turned back to Victor, who was now slumped in his chair, defeated. You've doomed us all, Edward said quietly. Pack your things. But Victor, in a final act of desperation, pulled out a printed document. Wait, he insisted. I have evidence that Jamal was the one causing disruption. An email from a passenger complaining about his behavior. Edward snatched the paper, scanning it, his eyes narrowing. This is fake. The timestamp doesn't even match the flight. Did you really think this would save you? Victor's silence was confirmation enough. Edward stood, his voice echoing with finality. You're finished. Dylan Reeves, Emily Carter, Captain Hayes, everyone involved will be terminated. If we have any chance of saving this company, we have to start with accountability. Outside the glass walls of the boardroom, the city moved on, unaware of the decisions being made inside. But the ripple of those decisions would soon shake the entire airline industry. Edward's phone buzzed with another notification. Apex's stock had dropped another 3% in the last hour. He closed his eyes, exhaling heavily. Get the press team ready. We're going to fire them all. The boardroom in San Francisco filled with a silence so heavy it pressed against every wall, every breath, every heartbeat. And then Edward Langston rose from his chair, his voice steady but edged with steel. This meeting will decide the future of Apex Airways. Jamal Thompson, our largest shareholder, has made his demands clear. Either we take decisive action, or this airline collapses before the week is over. His words dropped like stones, and across the table, nervous eyes darted, pens clicked, papers shifted, but no one dared to interrupt. The double doors opened and Jamal himself entered, his tall frame commanding instant attention, his calm composure silencing even the whispers. He took his seat at the head of the table as though it had always been his, not waiting for permission, because his authority was no longer in question. Lena Brooks sat quietly behind him, her phone recording discreetly, prepared to document every word. Edward cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, we are prepared to discuss remedies. Jamal leaned forward, his gaze sweeping across the room. There is nothing to discuss. I am not here to negotiate. I am here to set terms. Emily Carter, Dylan Reeves, Captain Robert Hayes, and Victor Hale must be fired immediately. Their names must be on a press release before the day ends, and Brenda Hargrove must be permanently banned from flying with this airline. Murmurs erupted, but Jamal's raised hand silenced them. You saw the videos, you saw the bribe attempt, you saw the humiliation. If you think this company can survive with these people still on payroll, you are delusional. Victor, pale and sweating, slammed his fist on the table. This is outrageous. You can't destroy careers because of one misunderstanding. I've given 20 years to this company. Jamal turned his head slowly, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. You destroyed your own career when you tried to bribe a journalist and forge evidence. Integrity is not negotiable. Emily Carter began to cry softly, her voice trembling. Please, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was under pressure. I have debts. I made a mistake. Dylan Reeves, seated beside her, exploded in anger. Don't beg him. Emily, he doesn't care. This is all about power. He's just showing off because he owns stock. Jamal remained calm, but his words struck deep. This isn't about power. It's about accountability. You treated me as less than, not because of policy, not because of safety, but because of prejudice and greed. And if you can do it to me, a man with resources, imagine what you do to those with no voice at all. The weight of his words silenced even Dylan. Captain Hayes, who had remained quiet all this time, finally spoke, his voice weary. I just wanted to avoid conflict. I didn't support the decision, but I didn't stop it either. I've been a pilot for 30 years, and I didn't want to lose everything I've built. Jamal looked at him. His expression softened, but only slightly. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Captain, you of all people should know leadership means more than flying a plane. It means standing up when it matters. Hayes lowered his gaze, shame washing over him. Edward tapped the table sharply. Enough. Mr. Thompson, we accept your demands. Victor Hale, you are hereby terminated effective immediately. Dylan Reeves, Emily Carter, Captain Hayes, you are dismissed from duty as of this moment. Security will escort you out after this meeting. Victor shot to his feet, pointing at Jamal. You'll regret this. I'll sue. I'll drag this company and you through court until you beg me to stop. Jamal didn't flinch. Go ahead. The evidence is already public. Every lie you tell will only bury you deeper. Dylan cursed under his breath, storming out of the room. Emily sobbed, clutching her handbag, whispering apologies no one acknowledged. Captain Hayes rose slowly, gave Jamal a respectful nod, and left without a word, his career ending in silence. Victor remained defiant until two guards entered, placing hands on his shoulders, and for the first time his bravado cracked as they led him away. The boardroom exhaled collectively, the storm finally breaking. Jamal leaned back, his voice softer now. I don't take joy in this. Firing people is never a victory, but injustice left unchecked will destroy everything you've built. I'm not asking for punishment alone. I am offering a path forward. He placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward Edward. This is my proposal. Mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, from the boardroom to the baggage handlers. A new division dedicated to equity and customer service, monitored by independent auditors, and a partnership with Innovate AI to deploy technology that detects discriminatory patterns before they happen. This is how you save Apex. The board members leaned in, scanning the proposal. Some nodded quickly, others hesitated, but none could deny the necessity. Edward, weary but resolute, nodded. We will adopt this plan, and we will release a statement today. Jamal's voice grew firm again. Not just a statement, a public apology, delivered live, with my presence, acknowledging the failure and the commitment to change. Anything less will be dismissed as spin. Edward exhaled, defeated but grateful for direction. Agreed. Lena lowered her phone, whispering. History is being written here. Jamal turned to her, a faint smile on his lips. Not history, justice. And as the meeting adjourned, the staff once considered untouchable were escorted out into the daylight, stripped of their titles, their arrogance replaced by consequences. Outside the headquarters, reporters gathered, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. When word broke that 4 senior staff had been fired in a single sweep, the headlines exploded. Apex purge. Shareholder CEO forces firings. Equity demands shake airline industry. Jamal stood at the top of the steps, his voice carrying across the crowd. Today is not about revenge. It is about responsibility. We cannot erase what happened on that plane, but we can ensure it never happens again. The crowd erupted in applause, reporters shouting questions, but Jamal simply raised his hand, a gesture of closure. In that moment, Apex Airways had begun its reckoning, and the industry was watching. The next 72 hours became something no airline in America had ever attempted, because Jamal Thompson insisted that Apex Airways ground its entire fleet to conduct emergency anti-bias training, a move that shocked the industry, rattled Wall Street, and brought cameras swarming to every major airport. And while critics called it reckless, customers called it revolutionary, because for the first time, a company was choosing justice over profit, and that choice was guided by the man they had tried to humiliate only days earlier, inside training halls from Atlanta to Los Angeles. Thousands of employees sat in rows, watching videos of the incident, hearing Jamal's voice explain why bias destroys trust, why silence equals complicity, why fairness is not optional, and while some crossed their arms defensively, many lowered their heads in shame, realizing how easily they could have been part of the same injustice. Emily Carter sat in the front row of one session, no longer wearing her crisp uniform, just a plain sweater, her eyes swollen from nights of regret. And when the trainer asked volunteers to share, she stood trembling, her voice breaking. I thought I was protecting my job when I asked him to move, but the truth is, I was protecting Brenda's privilege. I chose fear over integrity, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. The room was silent, some employees shifting uncomfortably, others nodding with sympathy. And when the session ended, Emily stayed behind, signing up for Jamal's new program called Second Chance, a path designed not to punish, but to rehabilitate those who had failed. Dylan Reeves entered the program too, though his anger burned hot at first. During one session, he slammed his notebook down, muttering, "This is just a show. They don't care about us. They just care about their image." But the facilitator pressed him gently. Or maybe this is about giving you a chance to see beyond yourself. Why did you take Brenda's money? Dylan? He hesitated, his voice cracking for the first time. Because I couldn't pay my daughter's medical bills. Because I felt powerless. And when she offered cash, I told myself it was just helping family. But it wasn't. It was selling my integrity. Slowly. The walls around him began to crack. Captain Hayes attended reluctantly, sitting in the back, his arms folded tight. But when a young flight attendant asked him directly, "Why didn't you stop it?" his voice finally gave way to the weight he carried. Because I've seen colleagues lose their careers for speaking up. And after 30 years I was afraid of losing everything. But now I see that fear cost me my honor. His words carried through the room, a confession that struck chords in others who had remained silent in their own careers. Even Victor Hale, the proud and stubborn manager who had walked out of the boardroom in disgrace, found himself face to face with Jamal in a quiet office, cameras off, no reporters, just two men and the truth. Victor leaned forward, his voice low. I hated you the moment I saw you in that seat, not because of who you were, but because you reminded me of every man I envied, every man who succeeded where I failed. I told myself it was about order, but it was about resentment. You owned what I could never build. Jamal didn't flinch. Bias often hides behind uniforms, rules, excuses, but at its core it's fear, anger, resentment. The question is, what will you do with that now? Victor's eyes welled, his military composure finally breaking. I don't know, he admitted. Jamal extended a hand. Then start here. Teach others not to make your mistake. Join Second Chance. Not because you deserve it, but because others need to learn from your failure for the first time in years. Victor nodded humbly, shaking the hand of the man he had once despised. Outside the training halls, the consequences rippled wider. Brenda Hargrove, once proud of her entitlement, now faced a wave of cancellations from business partners who no longer wanted her name tied to theirs. And under pressure, she issued a public apology, her voice hollow but necessary. I let my privilege blind me. "And I am truly sorry," she said. But the internet was not quick to forgive. Memes of her smirk flooding timelines, her name forever tied to arrogance. Meanwhile, Lena Brooks stood beside Jamal at press conferences. No longer just a reporter, but now a consultant hired by Apex to oversee transparency and reforms. Her voice carried strength as she told audiences, "This isn't about one viral video. This is about rewriting the culture of an entire industry." Jamal launched the Equity Flight Initiative, a program that provided legal aid and compensation funds to victims of discrimination in travel, with Apex contributing $75 million to start, and other airlines soon pressured to match. Every day, new stories poured in, from passengers wrongfully profiled at check-in to employees silenced for speaking out. And for the first time, there was a platform that listened. Critics on talk shows sneered, saying Jamal was exploiting the scandal, but customers flooded Apex with messages of support, many rebooking tickets simply because they wanted to fly with a company that was trying to change in boardrooms. Edward Langston worked tirelessly with Jamal, a humbled man now, his hair seeming grayer by the week, but his resolve stronger. "You saved this company," he told Jamal one evening. "Not with money, but with conviction." Jamal only shook his head. "I didn't save it. The people who demanded better did. I just listened." For the fired employees in the Second Chance program, the journey was painful but real. Emily volunteered at shelters in her spare time. Dylan began teaching workshops on ethical decision-making. Hayes mentored young pilots about leadership beyond the cockpit. And Victor, surprisingly, became one of the most powerful voices in the program, telling raw stories about his prejudice and how it ruined his career. Stories that made trainees lean forward in stunned silence. Slowly, redemption took shape. And yet Jamal carried no illusions. He knew the fight was not finished. He knew one initiative could not erase centuries of bias. But he also knew this was the beginning of something larger. As the 72-hour training ended and flights resumed, the world watched as Apex Airways rebranded itself not just as an airline, but as a symbol of transformation. And in that moment, Jamal realized something profound. The seat they tried to take from him had become more than a seat. It had become a platform, a pulpit, a place where justice could finally take flight. 6 months later, the storm that had once threatened to bury Apex Airways had become the very wind lifting it higher. Because under Jamal Thompson's leadership, the airline was no longer just a company, but a case study in redemption. Its revenues up 15%, its customer satisfaction at an all-time high, and its name spoken in boardrooms not as a cautionary tale, but as a model of change. And at the center of it all stood the man who had once been humiliated for simply sitting in seat 2A in San Francisco. The Equity Flight Initiative had grown into a global platform, supporting travelers and employees who had suffered discrimination, providing compensation, legal assistance, and advocacy. And Jamal often reminded his team, "We're not just fixing flights, we're fixing lives." At a press conference filled with flashing cameras, he stood alongside Lena Brooks, now Director of Equity Communications for Apex, and Sofia Ramirez, his trusted COO, announcing the expansion of the program to Europe and Asia. Reporters asked about profits, logistics, competition. But Jamal returned again and again to the same message. Justice is not a line item, it's a foundation. Meanwhile, the Second Chance program, once controversial, had become a cornerstone of Apex's rebranding, because the very people once fired in shame now stood as living examples of what accountability and growth could mean. Emily Carter spoke at conferences about the danger of compromising integrity, her voice steady as she said, "I was the one who asked him to move. I thought I was protecting my job, but I was betraying my values. Thanks to this program, I have learned to face my failures and rebuild with honesty." Dylan Reeves, who had once exploded in anger, now taught leadership workshops where he admitted openly, "I took money to betray fairness, and I almost lost my family because of it. The only way forward was to own my choices and teach others not to repeat them." Captain Hayes mentored young pilots, reminding them that silence is not neutrality, but complicity. And the most surprising transformation of all was Victor Hale, the man who once tried to cover up the scandal with lies and bribes, now standing before groups of trainees saying, "I let bias define my choices, and it cost me everything. Don't make my mistake. Face your prejudice, because if you don't, it will destroy you and everyone around you." Audiences listened because his regret was real, and his vulnerability gave weight to his words. Even Brenda Hargrove, once the face of entitlement, had been forced into her own reckoning, her business deals crumbling after the scandal, her name dragged across headlines, and while she would never be welcomed back to Apex, she found a form of atonement by funding scholarships for underprivileged youth. A gesture that many doubted at first, but slowly grew into genuine work that earned cautious respect. For Jamal, the personal victories were quieter but deeper. He visited his father's grave in Atlanta, the same man whose job loss decades earlier had planted the seed of his mission. And as he stood with flowers in his hand, he whispered, "They tried to take my seat, Dad, but they couldn't take my dignity. And now, because of you, millions more will never have to lose theirs." The wind carried his words across the cemetery, and for a moment he felt his father's presence, proud and unshaken. Later that week, he walked through a bustling terminal where Apex now displayed bold signs reading "Equity in Action," where diverse staff greeted passengers with warmth, where AI-driven systems monitored service for fairness, and where customers approached him just to say thank you. A mother with 2 children hugged him, tears in her eyes. "Because of you, my son believes he can fly without fear." A young employee shook his hand, saying, "I almost quit after years of harassment, but now I feel seen." Jamal carried those voices with him, more valuable than stock prices or headlines. Yet he also knew the fight was bigger than one airline. He testified before Congress, calling for federal standards on anti-bias protocols in aviation, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "The sky belongs to all of us," he declared. "And no passenger, no employee, no citizen should be told they don't belong in a seat they've rightfully earned." Applause erupted, and soon legislation began to take shape. Inspired by what had started as one humiliating incident in a first-class cabin, in quieter moments, Jamal met with Lena and Sophia at his San Francisco office, overlooking the bay, reflecting on how far they had come. Lena smiled, shaking her head. "It's wild to think it started with me holding up my phone," Sophia added, "and with you refusing to move from 2A. Jamal chuckled softly, then grew serious. "No, it started long before that. It started with every person who was told they didn't belong. We just finally had the chance to show the world." On the anniversary of the incident, Apex held a public event at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the very place where the storm had begun, and Jamal stood before employees, passengers, and press, unveiling a plaque that read, "Equity Flight Initiative, founded in the pursuit of dignity, justice, and change." His speech was short but powerful. "This plaque isn't for me. It's for every traveler who was silenced, every worker who was overlooked, every child who was told they couldn't dream. Today, we commit again to making the sky fair for all." The crowd erupted in applause, some wiping away tears, and as the cameras captured the moment, Jamal knew the message had landed. Justice was not about punishment alone, but about progress. Forgiveness had made room for redemption. Accountability had given birth to transformation, and a single stolen seat had become the spark for an industry-wide movement. As the event closed, a young boy tugged on Jamal's sleeve, his eyes wide with admiration. Mister, I want to be like you when I grow up. Jamal knelt, smiling warmly. Be better than me. Son, start by standing for what's right, even when it's hard. The boy nodded, his mother beaming beside him. And with that, Jamal walked away, his stride steady, his mission clear, knowing that though one battle had ended, the work of justice never truly stops, because dignity, once defended, must be protected again and again, until fairness is not the exception, but the rule. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it touched you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Your support means everything.